What's up, college football addicts? Today, we've got an incredible show prepared for you, and I'm going to talk to you about the future of the ACC and how some of the mid-tier teams actually may have a secret way of getting out of the ACC and into the SEC or the Big 10. By mid-tier, I don't mean that as a shot. I know I heard from you guys yesterday down in the comments. I'm talking about that second grouping of teams. Teams like Miami, Louisville, Virginia Tech, Duke, Pittsburgh, Virginia, NC State. Now, if you're a fan of one of those teams, you're certainly going to want to stick around. But even if you're not, stick around because I promise that I may blow your mind with today's update. For fans joining us for the first time or coming back, welcome to College Football Addiction. Incredibly happy to have you here with us today. Recently, I put out a video explaining why the mid-tier teams in the ACC, those teams who do not currently have a guaranteed spot in the Big 10 or the SEC, why those teams should still dissolve the league prior to June 30th. In that video, we touched a little bit on how it was possible that some of those teams could make their way into the Big 10 or the SEC. One way that we discussed was for a team like NC State to slide in with North Carolina in order to work around the state legislature hurdle that we assume is there in North Carolina. Now, that also assumes that North Carolina is valuable enough to a conference to cover the difference of NC State's lack of value. But we heard a lot of pushback in the comments from some of you who said that there was no way these teams could ever join the Big 10 or the SEC. A lot of people brought up the additive requirements and said that none of these schools would actually add value to the TV deal. And because of this, the SEC or the Big 10 would actually lose money by adding them. You guys said that, therefore, no team in the SEC or Big 10 would vote to lower their payouts by adding them. And you guys are absolutely correct in that regard. Adding any one of these teams would cost the SEC and the Big 10 money. But what if there was a way around it where these teams could be added and actually make the SEC and the Big 10 money? Before I dive in and break it down for you, I want to warn you guys of something that you need to understand. Today, we're going to put on our future hats because what we are about to discuss isn't happening right now. See, right now, the SEC and the Big Ten's current objective is to acquire all the teams who meet the additive requirements, meaning to acquire all of the teams who actually increase the value of the TV deals for their conference, which means FSU and Clemson and UNC are their primary objectives. Those teams are net gains for the league. Plus, nobody wants an antitrust lawsuit on their hands. But as soon as these objectives are finished, I feel pretty confident telling you that there is going to be another round of conference realignment with these second-tier teams. Let me ask you a question. Let's say it's 2026 and the Big 10 and the SEC teams are worth an estimated $120 million per year after the new college football playoff contract kicks in. And the Big 12 is worth $60 million per year. What would you do with a team whose current media rights are closer to the SEC or the Big 10's $120 million than they are to the Big 12's $60 million? What we need to understand here is that we have already seen tons of examples of teams buying their way into the Big 10 and the ACC by taking a discount for the first several years that they're in a conference. Oregon and Washington, Stanford, Cal, and SMU, they all took varying levels of discounts to join their respective conferences. But what's to stop teams from joining the SEC or the Big 10 who agree to participate at a permanently reduced rate? Say, for instance, a team agrees to 80% of the SEC or the Big 10 payout, and the math on that 80% meets the SEC or Big 10's additive requirements and makes the teams extra money. In that situation, taking 80% would create a win-win for everyone. And what I'm telling you is that there are a lot of teams who fit into that gray area, which could add value to a conference by taking a permanent 60 to 90% of the SEC or Big 10 payout. Now, I know some of you out there hear that and get pissed off. I know some of you are getting ready to race down to the comments and tell me how unfair that would be and how those teams would be at a permanent disadvantage. But what would you prefer if it was your team who was in one of the mid-tier teams? Would you prefer to be at a permanent disadvantage in the Big 12 or the ACC, making around $50 to $60 million a year, or the permanent disadvantage in the Big 10 or the SEC, making $90 to $100 million a year at a discount? What gives you the best chance to be able to invest more resources into your future competitiveness? And what do you want to sell your recruits? Playing in the SEC or the Big 10, or playing in the Big 12 or the ACC? This is the question that a lot of these teams are going to have to answer. And I guarantee you it is not a hard decision. But I am curious as to what you guys think. Would you take an 80% payout from the Big 10 or the SEC? Type out the word discount in the comments. If you would stay in the Big 12 and just settle for that 50% of their revenue, type in Big 12 down in the comments. Let's talk about it, and you can explain why you picked either one if you care to. Now, I'm not saying that these permanently reduced rates couldn't have some common sense provisions built in. If a team eventually achieved 100% of the additive requirements, then they should be added for the full amount. In fact, I'd argue that a deal like this should look in annually on these teams and adjust based on their growth or loss. And there are a lot of up-and-coming teams in states with fast-growing media markets in the South, and there are some sleeping giants in mass media markets who, if they ever awoke, could get to 100% fairly easy. I'm looking at a team down in South Florida about that right now. The whole goal would be to put these borderline teams in a position to grow into a full-time member, but you do it without any of the guarantees or the year-by-year countdowns like what Oregon and Washington has. Let the actual results drive the payouts. But this is only one massive change that I think is likely in the future. While we're thinking outside the box, let's go to the next level of the matrix. The next level is football and basketball teams competing in one conference while Olympic sports compete in another. Say, for example, Duke basketball. Duke's basketball team would certainly be an additive to the Big 10 or the SEC. So what's stopping you from adding them in basketball only and then playing all of their other sports in a different conference? For example, FSU. What if FSU makes better sense for football and basketball to join the Big 10, but their Olympic sports play in the SEC to avoid the travel? In the future, you can expect more scenarios where teams' revenue-generating sports play in one league and their non-revenue-generating sports play in another. That just makes too much sense. And with the newfound partnership between the SEC and the Big 10, once the ACC collapses and the Big 12's role is clearly defined, I think you'll see all of these leagues playing much nicer within each other, especially in regards to allowing Olympic sports to participate in other leagues. And the economics just make far better sense as well. As a fan of a lot of the Olympic sports, I just got done watching a college baseball game, and last weekend I took my daughter to a college softball game. I enjoy the Olympic sports, but I also enjoy when the economics of those sports makes a lot more sense. And could this be a change that we also see in the future? And could it make it easier on an athletic program to go from one conference to another? Would Duke be an immediate add for the SEC or Big 10 if it was just their hoops team? If there was no football to come along with it? I don't know, maybe. Let's talk about all this down in the comments. Again, tell me what you would do. If you were a fan of a mid-level team, are you going to the Big 10 or SEC for a discount? You stay in the Big 12 or the ACC for whatever pennies they have on the dollar. Let's talk about it down below. If you're not subscribed already and you watched this entire 10-plus minute video, do me a favor and go ahead and join the family at College Football Addiction by hitting the subscribe button now.